Hi, I'm Isla.
I was 10 the first time they forgot my birthday. I sat in the corner of our living room wearing a paper crown I'd made myself, holding a slice of cake I'd asked our neighbor to help me bake. The frosting was cracked, the candles were reused, and no one sang. I told myself they were just busy. My mom had just started her new job at the dentist's office, and Dad was in between gigs, which meant he mostly sat on the porch drinking and muttering about how the world owed him more. My older brothers, Jay and Leo, were somewhere between adolescence and trouble, in and out of the house, sneakers slamming the door every time they left. I remember whispering happy birthday to myself and thinking it's okay, next year will be different. But next year, and every year after, it wasn't. They remembered Leo's birthday with balloons and sparklers. Jay got his favorite barbecue ribs and a speaker he'd wanted for months. Even Mom got a surprise dinner once from all of us. Well, for me mostly, since I was the one who cleaned and cooked and cut coupons to make it happen. But when my day came around, there was always an excuse.
Oh, was that today?
We'll do something next weekend. Money's tight right now. Didn't you say you didn't like a big fuss? After a while, I stopped reminding them. At first, it was an act of pride. I'll see if they remember on their own, I thought. Then it became protection. Because when they didn't, I could pretend I hadn't cared. By 17, I had a part-time job at the gas station 2 blocks down. I worked nights after school and saved every tip, every penny, in a jar I hid under my bed. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was afraid they'd take it, but because I knew they'd ask. There was always some emergency. The car needed new tires. Jay needed help with bail, again. Mom's hours had been cut. Every time I saved something, it vanished into someone else's crisis. So I started lying. I told them the station stopped allowing tips. I said I had to pay a school fee or a lost textbook fine. They didn't question me much. They were used to me figuring things out. I was invisible in the way girls like me often are, quiet, helpful, the one who picks up slack without being asked. When I graduated high school, no one showed up. I walked the stage in borrowed shoes and took a selfie with the janitor on my way out. My family threw a barbecue the following week, but it wasn't for me. It was for Leo getting off probation. I smiled anyway, served plates, and refilled drinks like a waitress at someone else's celebration. College wasn't really an option. We didn't have the money, and I didn't have the time. So I found a job in admin at a property management company. The office was gray and cold and smelled like stale coffee, but it came with a desk, a regular paycheck, and the luxury of silence. No one yelled at me there. No one asked me for anything beyond a signature or a spreadsheet. I learned fast. Property values, tax codes, zoning laws. I listened more than I talked and took notes in a little black notebook I kept tucked in my bag. By 21, I knew more about real estate than anyone else in the office, including my supervisor, who still thought a lien was something you wiped off a window. I didn't tell him otherwise. I just kept learning. Back at home, things were mostly the same. The house smelled like microwave dinners and cigarette smoke. Leo had moved in with a girlfriend, but Jay was back again after another failed job. Mom still worked at the dentist's office, now part-time due to her back. Dad had disappeared somewhere down south, last we heard. I still lived there, in the smallest room with a broken window, helping pay the rent with my check and pretending it was okay. On my 20th birthday, I made myself pancakes and ate them in the car. No one said anything, not even later that night. That was the last time I waited. I moved out 6 months later. Found a tiny studio downtown with creaky pipes and a landlord who lived in Florida. But it was mine. I bought a secondhand couch and a table that tilted slightly to the left. I painted the walls yellow. No one came to visit. Not once. They called, of course, when they needed things. Could I pick up groceries for Mom? Jay needed a ride to court. Leo's girlfriend was pregnant and could use some baby stuff. I helped always. But something had started to shift inside me, something I didn't have a name for yet. It felt like closing a door, slowly, 1 inch at a time. A year later, the company I worked for was expanding. My boss called it aggressive acquisition. They were buying up foreclosures and rental homes across the county, flipping them or hiking up rents to match market rates. He laughed when he told me about it, like it was all a game. But I didn't laugh. I watched. I started buying, too. Quietly. My credit was good. I had savings now, real ones, spread across different accounts. I knew where the undervalued houses were. I knew which tenants were about to leave. I knew how to stay invisible. The first property I bought was a duplex near the river. The next, a small home 3 blocks from the park. The third was the one I had been waiting for 12 Carter Lane. My family's house. The one they'd been renting for years. I watched it come up on our listings like fate, like a dare. The owner had passed away. The kids wanted it gone fast. I offered cash. No haggling. No inspection. The papers were signed in less than a week. I stared at the deed for a long time before I touched it. My name printed clean across the top. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just sat very still. They didn't know, of course. The landlord had always been a mystery. The rent checks went to a P.O. box. When it came time to renew the lease, I used the company's letterhead and sent a formal notice with new terms. Minor increase, just enough to match the market. Enough to sting, but not enough to panic. I waited. They called me that night, furious. Not to me, of course, they didn't know it was me. They vented on speakerphone while I pretended to be surprised. Mom said it was robbery. Jay blamed the government. Leo said maybe it was time to move somewhere cheaper. I told them I'd look into it. Then I raised it again the next year. Not much, just enough to remind them that nothing stays the same forever. They grumbled, but stayed. I think part of them still liked being in that house. It was familiar.
Easy.
Just like me. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my closest friend, the one who had offered me her couch that first night I moved out. Some truths aren't secrets because they're shameful. They're secrets because they're sharp and you have to hold them carefully. I visited the house once while they were gone. Walked through the backyard where I used to swing Milo, my neighbor's kid who always tagged along. The swing was gone now. The yard was patchy. But the light still hit the back porch just right at sunset, painting everything gold. I left a wind chime on the fence. No note. That year on my birthday, I took the day off work. I made myself a full breakfast, eggs and toast, and real coffee with cream. I watched the sunrise from my apartment window and didn't check my phone. I didn't expect messages. They hadn't come in years. Around noon, I got a voicemail from Mom. She sounded distracted. Hey, just checking if you're around. Jay's car broke down, and he might need a ride.
Anyway, call me if you can.
I didn't call back. Instead, I pulled out a folder from my drawer, one marked Personal Assets. Inside were deeds, receipts, a list of properties with tiny notes beside them. Next to 412, Carter Lane, I added a date. Lease ends June 30th. Options. Renew at market plus 12% or terminate. My hand didn't shake as I wrote it. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped trying to be chosen. I didn't know the exact moment. Maybe it was the birthday voicemail. Maybe it was watching my brothers get second and third chances, while I was expected to make do with less. Maybe it was the day I stood in that backyard and realized no one would recognize the chime I left behind. Whatever it was, it had settled deep in me, a quiet shift, like soil changing underfoot. I didn't feel bitter. I felt awake. For the first time, I was making decisions for myself. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, but because I could. Because I had the power to decide what stayed and what didn't. What came next wasn't planned, but it felt inevitable. Like all the pieces had been waiting for me to notice them, to put them in the right order. And when it started, when everything began to unravel and reveal what had always been underneath, I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. I just watched it unfold. Because sometimes, forgetting someone's birthday isn't the biggest thing you do wrong. Sometimes, it's just the beginning. 2 months before the lease was set to expire, I received an email from the maintenance contractor I had on retainer. The kitchen faucet at 412, Carter Lane was leaking again, the same one I had once fixed with duct tape as a teenager when no one else bothered. The report came with photos, a blurry image of the same countertop where I used to line up sliced apples for Leo after school. I approved the repair, then added a quiet note to the tenant file. Signs of wear. Recommend full inspection before renewal. It felt procedural. Cold. But I wasn't cold. I was focused. That same afternoon, I drove past the house, not to check on the repairs, but to remind myself that it was real.
Meaning?
A physical proof of everything I'd built when no one else believed I was building anything at all. 2 weeks later, a certified letter went out with the lease options. They could either renew at the updated rate or vacate within 60 days. I didn't expect a response right away, but it came faster than I thought. My mom called me at work. I saw her name flash across my phone, the same number that had once sent me a happy birthday text 2 days late, followed by sorry was swamped. I let it ring the first time. She called again 5 minutes later. I picked up. Her voice was small, like she already knew I wouldn't offer comfort. She said the new rent was too high, that it was unfair, that they'd always lived there, always paid on time. I told her it was a market adjustment, nothing personal. She paused then, like something inside her clicked. She asked if I was the owner. I didn't answer. Silence filled the call, thick and buzzing. Then she said, "So that's what this is?" And I replied, "No, this is business." She hung up. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. But hollowness is still a space, and I had learned to live in spaces no one else wanted to see. Jay called next. He cursed a lot, said I was stabbing them in the back, accused me of being greedy. The same Jay who never once offered to help with groceries when I lived there. The same Jay who mocked my admin job, said it wasn't real work. Leo didn't call, but I heard through a mutual cousin that he was furious, said I had changed. That word always stuck to women like a stain.
Changed.
As if we were supposed to stay small, stay soft, stay willing. The week after, my mom showed up at my apartment. I watched her through the peephole for 10 minutes before opening the door. She looked thinner than I remembered, older too. She didn't ask to come in, just stood there holding a crumpled envelope. Inside was a letter she'd written by hand. It started with "Dear baby girl," and ended with "We never meant to make you feel like you didn't matter." There was no apology in the middle. Just a recounting of hard times, bills, dad leaving, how she had to raise boys who kept falling apart. I nodded as she spoke, even though I wasn't agreeing. I let her talk, let her cry a little, let her believe this was a conversation that would change something. Then I said I'd think about it. She left with a forced smile and a God bless, like she was praying her words had worked. I didn't change the lease terms. 1 week before the move-out deadline, a new twist landed in my inbox. A police report. Noise complaint. Jay had hosted a party, loud music, broken bottles on the curb, a small fire pit that nearly tipped over. The officer noted minors present. I added it to the file. Grounds for non-renewal. I sent the final notice the next morning. No further extensions. The house must be vacated by June 30th. That's when the real storm began. It wasn't just phone calls anymore. It was messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Cousins I didn't know had my number. One said I was heartless. Another said I was making my mother homeless. An aunt sent a long text about how family is supposed to forgive, which I read twice before deleting. No one had texted me on my birthday 2 months earlier. No one had reached out when I was eating cold cereal alone in my studio 5 years back. They only remembered I existed when my boundaries inconvenienced them. But the twist I didn't expect came from a place I hadn't looked in years. In one of my older email accounts, the one I used in high school, I found a forwarded message chain. It had been sent by Leo's girlfriend, who apparently thought I needed to see the truth. Attached was a string of emails from 4 years ago, my birthday month, between my mother and a distant uncle who managed a trust fund I didn't even know existed. The trust, it turned out, had been left by my grandmother, a woman I only met twice, who had willed a modest sum to each of her grandchildren for education or housing. Each of my brothers had received theirs. Quietly. Privately. Mine had been delayed, they said at the time, due to paperwork issues. But the emails revealed otherwise. My portion had been used by my mom for Jay's bail and Leo's car. The balance had been zero for years. I stared at the screen, blinking. My breath shallow. I didn't forward it. I didn't reply. I just let it sit there like a fire I was choosing not to throw gasoline on yet. On June 30th, I drove by the house one final time. The porch was empty. The windows dark. A single trash bag sat by the curb, half open, spilling old shoes and a torn pillow. They were gone. I walked up the steps, unlocked the door with my copy of the key, and stepped inside. The air was stale. The walls were bare. In the back bedroom, my old room, someone had written something in chalk on the wall. Thanks for nothing. I smiled without humor. I walked through the house slowly, touching the door frames, the counters, the light switches. I didn't feel like I was home. I felt like I had outgrown something I didn't even know I'd been trapped inside. I listed the house for sale that week. A young couple bought it, first-time homeowners with a baby on the way. I sold it to them below market, enough to cover my profit margin but still give them a real shot. I left them a note in the drawer under the kitchen sink. It said, "Take care of this place." It held more stories than you'd think. I didn't sign it. After the sale, I booked a trip. Just me. Somewhere quiet and warm. I turned off my phone for the entire week. I read books by the beach, drank coffee that tasted like chocolate, and didn't think once about Carter Lane. But when I came back, the emails were waiting. One from my mom. One from Jay. One from an attorney representing Leo. They were contesting the use of the trust, saying I had no right to judge, saying I was being vindictive. But I had already forwarded the original chain to my own lawyer, who assured me I had grounds for legal action, even if the money was gone. I could pursue charges. I could file a civil suit. But I didn't. I just asked for a public acknowledgement. One message. One admission that what they did was wrong. I never got it. Instead, I posted my first video. Not a rant. Not an exposé.
Just a story. Simple, calm.
I talked about being forgotten, about birthdays that came and went without notice, about the slow unraveling of trust, and how power can look like silence until it doesn't. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. The comments came in waves. Women mostly.
Some men.
All saying same. Some shared their own versions. Some just said thank you. Within days, I had more attention from strangers than I'd ever had from my own family. And then came the twist I never saw coming. A message from the trust administrator's office. A correction. A misfiled document. A portion of the trust, smaller, but real, was still unclaimed. It had sat in a holding account untouched. It was mine. Legally. They'd be wiring the amount within 10 business days. I stared at the email, blinking. Then I smiled. Not because of the money, but because I hadn't needed it anymore. The wire transfer cleared the following Thursday. It wasn't a life-changing amount, not the way some people imagined inheritances to be, but it was enough to mark a line in my life, before and after. I stared at the deposit on my phone screen and didn't move for a while. I remembered that envelope my mom had left years ago with $40 inside, saying, "Hope this helps." Now I had enough to buy 40 of those envelopes 100 times over. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something stranger, quiet. Like I'd finally climbed out of a well and was hearing the world clearly again. I used part of the money to pay off the last of my student loan, the one I'd taken secretly years ago for an online course in property law. I didn't tell anyone. The rest I set aside in a new account labeled, "No one's business." I didn't rush to spend it. I let it sit, gaining interest. I bought one thing, a black leather chair for my apartment, the kind that hugged you like you mattered. I placed it by the window where the light came in best, and it became my reading corner, my thinking space, the one place where I never felt borrowed. But peace, I was learning, never lasts long when you come from people who feed on conflict. It started with whispers, distant cousins calling mutual friends, asking if I was okay, or if I was still angry. Then came the online posts, vague enough to deny, but sharp enough to sting. Some people love to play victim. She always thought she was better. Money changes people.
I didn't reply.
I didn't post a single word. But I read every line, and I remembered every name. The real twist came in the form of a letter postmarked from a nearby town. It had no return address, just my name handwritten on the envelope in blue ink. Inside was a photograph, old and faded, of me at 7 years old, blowing out candles on a cake I didn't remember. My brothers on either side of me, smiling. My mother in the background, distracted. On the back of the photo, written in the same hand, were 4 words: "You are never forgotten."
No signature.
I stared at the photo for hours that night. I couldn't decide if it was an apology or a warning, a soft guilt trip, or someone trying to rewrite the past. The cake didn't jog any real memory. The photo might have been real, or staged, or even borrowed from someone else's day. The handwriting didn't look familiar. I didn't sleep much. My brain kept circling the question, what if they believed their version? What if they truly thought they had done enough? A few days later, a new tenant applied for one of my properties. I recognized the name immediately. Alyssa Greer, Leo's girlfriend. The one who'd forwarded me the trust emails. The application was clean. Solid credit.
Steady job.
1 child listed. I almost denied it on instinct, but then I paused. I called her directly. I expected awkwardness, maybe apologies. What I didn't expect was what she said.
She didn't want pity, she said.
She was done with Leo. Moved out months ago. He hadn't seen their daughter in weeks. She was trying to start over, but rents were high and landlords were sharks. She figured if anyone would be fair, it'd be me. Then, very quietly, she added that she'd left that photo in my mailbox. I thought maybe it'd mean something, even if it didn't fix anything. I approved her application. The day she picked up the keys, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a drawing from her daughter, a house with a big sun over it, and a stick figure labeled Miss A. I smiled and said thank you. Later, I pinned it to my fridge, right next to my overdue dentist appointment reminder. I'd forgotten about the appointment for weeks. No one reminded me. The weeks passed quietly after that. I kept working. I kept walking past the bakery down the street without going in. I didn't trust myself not to buy things I didn't need. But on my next birthday, something shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. I just woke up and didn't wait. I made a reservation for one at a small Italian place I'd read about online. I wore a green dress. I ate dessert first. And when the waiter brought the check and asked if I was celebrating something, I said yes. He smiled like he understood, and I tipped him well. That night, I uploaded a new video. It wasn't angry. It wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering yourself. The version of you that existed before the noise, before the obligation, before you became the person who always showed up even when no one saved you a seat. I told my viewers about the house, the rent, the trust fund, but only in outlines. The truth wasn't the drama. It was the clarity. I ended the video by saying, sometimes the only way to be seen is to stop hiding behind being helpful. The comments poured in, but so did something else. An email from a woman named Arlene. She said she was my grandmother's sister, that she'd been estranged from the family for decades after a falling out with my mom, that she'd been following my videos and believed I deserved to know a few things. She asked if I'd be willing to meet. I hesitated. I didn't trust easily anymore. But something about her email felt different. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered facts, receipts, photos. I met her at a small cafe near the courthouse, same place I once met Dorian to talk about the house years ago now. Arlene looked nothing like my family and everything like the version of myself I wished I could grow into.
Composed.
Sharp eyes. Silver hair pulled back into a braid. She handed me a folder, thick with old papers and notarized letters. Inside was a revised draft of my grandmother's will, one I'd never seen before. One where my name had been clearly outlined as sole recipient of not just the trust fund, but also a small rural property in her name. That property had been sold 5 years ago. The profit split between my mother and Leo. I felt dizzy. I thanked Arlene and asked why she was sharing this now. She said simply, Because I watched them erase you. And I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I didn't cry. I scanned everything, stored it, filed it, and made a decision. I didn't want to go after the money. I didn't need a courtroom. I wanted my story. I wanted my voice. And I wanted them to know I remembered every omission like a bruise that never faded. I wrote a new video script that night. This one was different. It wasn't for validation. It was a reckoning. It started with a birthday candle and ended with a house I no longer owned. It told the truth, not to burn bridges, but to make it clear that I had built my own. And when it went live, it did what none of the others had done. It caught fire. The video gained traction faster than anything I had ever uploaded. Within 24 hours, the view count passed 100,000. Comments flooded in, some cheering me on, others asking for details, a few doubting the whole thing like fiction too raw to be real. But I didn't need them to believe every piece. I just needed the silence to break. That silence, the one I had carried for years like a secret illness, was finally being replaced by noise that felt like validation. Some of the comments stayed with me longer than others. One simply read, "My mom did the same. I still send her flowers, and I don't know why." Another said, "I hope you kept the chair. I hope you know it was always your seat." I read them all. I replied to none. I wasn't ready for conversations. I was still crawling out of memory. The morning after the video dropped, I found an envelope slid under my apartment door. No stamp, no address. Just my name written on the front in a familiar hand, Mom's. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly folded.
No greeting.
Just one sentence. You didn't have to tell everyone. That was it.
No signature. No apology.
No denial, either. I stared at the words for a long time, then folded the paper back and slid it between pages of a book I'd been meaning to finish for years. Maybe someday I'd read it again and feel something different. But not today. Then came the news article. It was a local feature. Not about me, about Leo. His name was buried halfway through the story, under a headline about embezzlement at a mid-tier logistics company. Apparently, funds had gone missing over the course of months. Small transfers, clever methods, always just under the radar. The article didn't say outright who was responsible, but it painted a picture so familiar I didn't need confirmation. My phone buzzed minutes after the story posted, first with texts from old coworkers, then with calls from my cousin Danielle, the only one who had quietly supported me during the house fallout. I didn't answer anyone. I just watched the flames flicker from a distance, calm. But the twist didn't end there. Leo's name wasn't just in the article. It was in the case file. The company had filed charges, and court records were now public. His bail had been posted by someone listed only as M. Greer.
Mom.
She had taken out a personal loan to cover it. The same woman who had written me a note about not needing to make everything public had now emptied herself again for a son who never stayed long enough to fix anything he broke. The irony didn't sting. It numbed. A few days later, I got a voicemail.
Jay.
He didn't sound angry this time. He sounded tired. He said he'd watched the video. Said he remembered that birthday I mentioned, the one where no one showed up and I made my own cake. He said he thought about calling me then but didn't. He asked if I'd ever come to one of his cookouts again, even just to sit in the back. I didn't return the call. Not out of cruelty. Just clarity. Some people didn't need to be punished, they just didn't need to be let in again. But not everyone faded quietly. One night, after a late shift reviewing property documents, I came home to find a small box outside my door. No label. Inside was a silver bracelet, cheap but shiny, with a little heart charm attached. I recognized it immediately. It was mine. A gift I'd received from my grandmother when I turned 8. I'd thought it lost for years. Underneath it was a note that said, "She wanted you to have this. Always did." The note wasn't signed, but I didn't need to guess. Arlene. My grandmother's sister. The only one who had bothered to fill in the missing chapters. I wore the bracelet the next day. I posted a new video that weekend. It wasn't about the family anymore. It was about rebuilding. About how healing didn't always look like closure. It looked like boundaries. It looked like saying no and not feeling guilty. It looked like birthdays spent alone without sadness, like homes without apologies written into their walls. It looked like staying away, not because of pride, but because of peace. This one went viral too, but not because of drama. It went viral because too many people had lived it. Because too many people had mistaken survival for love. Then something happened that cracked everything open again. Danielle, my cousin, called one afternoon sounding shaken. She said Mom had fallen, slipped on wet tile in her new apartment. She was okay, but bruised, and no one had been answering her calls. The boys had distanced themselves after the video, after Leo's arrest, and Jay had moved to another state. She was alone. Danielle said, "I'm not asking you to fix it. I just thought you should know."
I didn't go to the hospital that day.
I went 2 days later, when the panic had settled. I brought flowers, ones I knew she was mildly allergic to, which made me laugh in the car, but not when I handed them over. She looked small in the bed. Older. We talked for 17 minutes. Not about the past. Not about money. Just about the weather. About how she missed the tree outside the old house. How she hadn't been sleeping well. I nodded. I asked if she needed anything.
She said no.
Then, just before I left, she reached into her drawer and pulled out an envelope.
"For your birthday," she said.
I opened it in the car. It was a card. The kind you get from a pharmacy rack, with glitter that falls off in your lap. Inside, in her familiar cursive, she had written, "I know I missed a lot. This is me trying not to miss more." No check.
No palegui.
Just the card. I didn't cry. I placed it in the glove compartment, next to an old receipt from my first property purchase. It felt appropriate there, between proof and maybe. That night, I sat in my leather chair and wrote the outline for the final video in the series. I wasn't sure how it would end yet. I just knew it wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about justice. It was about letting go. About closing the book even if the last chapter wasn't satisfying. About refusing to reread the parts that made me feel small. But even then, I didn't know what was coming next. I didn't know the last twist hadn't hit yet. It happened on a Tuesday morning, quiet, sunny, the kind of day that normally passed without incident. I had just sat down at my desk with a mug of coffee, about to finalize documents for a property auction, when my email pinged with a new message titled, "Regarding estate audit, property transfer inquiry." I assumed it was routine. Instead, it unraveled everything. The message was from a junior associate at a law firm I didn't recognize. Attached were scanned documents referencing the sale of a parcel of land, one I never knew existed, originally belonging to my grandmother. The name on the final sale line wasn't hers. It was my mother's, and the date was 3 months after Grandma's death. But the signature had been dated 6 weeks before. That was impossible. My grandmother had been in hospice during that time, barely conscious. I knew because I had visited her once, brought her a scarf she never wore, and held her hand while she slept.
She didn't speak.
She didn't sign anything. I stared at the documents again. Same signature, same last name, but something was off. The slant was wrong. The pen pressure changed halfway through. It was a forged signature. I was looking at fraud. My heart didn't race. I didn't feel anger. I felt that same cold clarity I had when I stood in front of the house they'd dumped my things from. Some truths don't explode. They echo. I made a single phone call. Not to my mother.
Not to Leo or Jay.
I called Arlene. She didn't sound surprised. She sighed and said she'd suspected as much for years, but had no access to the paperwork to prove it.
Until now.
I asked her if she thought I should press charges. She said, "I think you should choose peace. But I also think you should know the truth has weight. And sometimes it needs to land." I thanked her. Then I called my attorney. It took 2 weeks for the investigation to confirm everything. The signature had been copied from an old utility form. The notary listed had long since moved states. The land sale had gone through a private buyer, but the proceeds had been routed through a shared family account, one that included Leo and Jay as beneficiaries. My mother had been the facilitator. I sat with that information for days. And then, instead of suing, I wrote one final letter. I wrote it the same way I had once written in my childhood journal, quietly, not expecting anyone to read it, but needing it to be said. It wasn't vengeful. It wasn't cruel. It was a list of every birthday missed, every lie told, every dollar rerouted, every silence demanded, every moment I chose them over me. And at the end, I wrote, I'm done keeping your secrets. I am no longer your scapegoat, your solution, your invisible helper. I don't want your money. I don't need your validation. I just want space and silence. You gave it to me once as a punishment. I'm choosing it now as a gift. I didn't mail it. I posted it on my blog under my real name. Then I turned off my phone. The backlash came like waves. First the family, outrage, denial, demands to take it down. Accusations of slander, betrayal, disrespect. Then came the public, people choosing sides, others begging for more details. I didn't reply to a single message. I sat in my window chair, breathing. And then, quietly, something shifted.
People stopped talking about them.
They started talking about me. An email from a publisher. They'd seen my blog. They'd seen my videos. They asked if I'd be interested in writing a memoir. Something real. Something raw. I said yes. Weeks passed. Then months. My birthday came again, and for the first time in my life, I had plans. Not because someone invited me, but because I planned it myself. A small dinner. For chairs. One for Danielle, who brought homemade bread. One for Arlene, who gave me a vintage brooch that had belonged to my grandmother. One for Alyssa, who showed up with her daughter and a notebook full of poetry. And one for me. Not a spare. Not a borrowed one.
Mine.
We toasted with cheap wine and ate too much cake. At one point, Danielle asked what I wanted next. I said, nothing I have to beg for. They laughed, but I meant it. I had stopped chasing the impossible. I had stopped asking people to give me what they were never taught to offer. The book took shape slowly. Each chapter a wound I cleaned with words. I didn't name every name.
I didn't need to.
The power wasn't an exposure, it was an ownership. Of my story. My truth. My worth. I ended the manuscript with a memory I had never told anyone. It was my 13th birthday. The worst one. I had come home from school with a small cupcake from a teacher who noticed I hadn't been picked up for days. I brought it home in a plastic container, hoping someone would say happy birthday. But when I walked in, no one looked up. Jay was yelling at the TV. Mom was asleep. Leo was gone. I sat in the kitchen and ate the cupcake alone.
No candle.
No song. Just crumbs and quiet. And I remember thinking, maybe if I was louder, they'd remember. Maybe if I was better, smarter. But now I know better. The people who forget you when you're quiet will not love you better when you scream. So I stopped screaming. The book was published the following spring. Not a bestseller, but enough to matter. Enough to reach inboxes and libraries and quiet corners where people needed to read something they couldn't say out loud yet. I received a letter. Yes, an actual letter from a woman in Iowa who said, "You gave me the courage to leave a table that never served me." I kept that letter taped to my fridge. And then, quietly, one last thing happened. I got a message from a woman named Evelyn. She introduced herself as my grandmother's former caretaker. She had kept in touch with Arlene, and she had something to give me, a box my grandmother had asked her to hold until the quiet one came looking. Inside the box was a necklace, a tiny gold locket with nothing inside. And a note. "You were always mine." I cried then. The ugly kind. The kind that doesn't fix anything but releases everything. I wore that necklace every day for a month. I still wear it when I need to remember that love can be hidden, but it doesn't disappear. That not all things stolen are lost forever. My story didn't end with a courtroom victory or a dramatic confrontation. It ended the day I chose myself, finally, fully. The day I understood that revenge is loud, but healing is quiet. The day I stopped waiting for an apology and started living like I'd already earned one.
They still haven't said sorry.
Maybe they never will. But I'm not waiting anymore. And I haven't missed a birthday since.